If you draw a line straight down the middle of the United States, something bizarre happens. 80% of the American population lives to the right of this line. The eastern half of the country is a sprawling, interconnected web of massive cities, towns, and infinite green farmland. But cross that line to the left, and the map suddenly goes dark. Aside from the coastlines, the western half of the United States is essentially empty, or as real estate agents call it, up and coming. We are talking about millions of square miles, a vast, silent expanse of deserts, plains, and mountains that could fit entire European countries inside them several times over. But the real mystery isn't why everyone crowded into the east. The real story is the invisible wall that stops them from moving west. It is a geographic barrier so powerful that it dictates where we build our cities, what food you eat, and how long the American superpower can sustain itself. This isn't an accident, and it isn't just empty space. It's a multi-billion-dollar geographic cheat code that is rapidly running out of time. To understand the emptiness, you have to look at this specific coordinate, the 100th Meridian. For over a century, geographers have known that this exact line of longitude acts as a brutal divider. It splits the United States into two entirely different worlds. East of the 100th Meridian, the U.S. receives over 20 inches of rainfall every single year. In the world of agriculture, 20 inches is the magic number. It's the exact amount of natural moisture required to grow crops without needing artificial irrigation. It's why the East is green, densely populated, and economically bulletproof. You drop seeds in the dirt, the sky provides the water, and civilization thrives. But the moment you cross the 100th Meridian, the sky essentially clocks out for the day. The rain simply shuts off. You enter a landscape defined entirely by its lack of water. Why? You can blame the mountains. To understand the geography of the American West, you have to understand how water moves through the air. As weather systems roll in from the Pacific Ocean, carrying billions of gallons of moisture, they crash into a series of massive speed bumps. First, the Sierra Nevada range, then the Great Basin, and finally the towering Rocky Mountains. Look closely at a city like Denver. It doesn't just happen to sit at the edge of the mountains, it operates as a literal fortress gate. It marks the exact collision point where the flat plains hit a 14,000-foot wall of rock. As weather systems are forced up and over these peaks, the air cools rapidly, and it can no longer hold on to its water. To the west, the peaks scrape the moisture right out of the sky. This is why areas just a short drive away into the Rockies get buried in massive world-class snowfall. The mountains selfishly hoard all the water. By the time those weather systems cross over the Front Range and descend onto the plains to the east, they are completely dry. This creates what meteorologists call a rain shadow, a massive continental dead zone stretching from the Dakotas down to Texas, where natural rainfall drops below 20 inches, making traditional survival and agriculture nearly impossible. And for early American settlers, this geographic reality was about to create a massive, deadly problem. In the mid-1800s, the United States government had a massive problem. Through a series of treaties and wars, they had just acquired millions of acres of land out west, but nobody wanted to live there. Early European explorers had taken one look at the region and officially labeled it the Great American Desert. It was a vast ocean of tough prairie grass, perfectly suited for nomadic Native American tribes who had expertly adapted to the arid, fast-moving reality of the plains. But for European settlers looking to build permanent, stationary farms, it was effectively a death sentence. To fix this PR nightmare, the government passed the Homestead Act of 1862. They aggressively marketed this empty space, offering 160 acres of free land to anyone willing to move past the 100th Meridian, build a house, and farm it. Railroad companies immediately joined the grift. They needed customers to ride their new trains, so they printed millions of pamphlets in multiple languages and shipped them across Europe, promising lush, green utopias. It was the 19th century equivalent of a late-night infomercial, and it worked spectacularly. But there was a catch. The government's own scientists knew it was a trap. In 1878, a legendary explorer and geologist named John Wesley Powell submitted a formal report to Congress. Powell wasn't an armchair academic. He was a one-armed Civil War veteran who had just successfully navigated the brutal, unmapped rapids of the Grand Canyon. He explicitly warned Congress that the land past the 100th Meridian was simply too dry for normal farming. He pleaded with them to rethink the 160-acre grid system. He explained that out here, a single family would need massive amounts of land and federally controlled irrigation just to survive the inevitable droughts. Congress predictably ignored him. They didn't want to hear about geographic limits. They wanted economic expansion and a continent-spanning railroad empire. So they backed one of the most dangerous and frankly hilarious marketing scams in history, a pseudo-scientific theory called rain follows the plow. Politicians and land developers literally convinced the American public that the sheer act of moving there, building towns, and aggressively digging up the dirt would magically hack the atmosphere, summon clouds, and cause it to rain. So essentially, the US government handed thousands of people a piece of paper, pointed at a barren desert, and said, "Good luck, try digging harder." Spoiler alert, rain does not follow the plow. Millions of people had moved past the 100th Meridian. Believing the marketing, they ripped up millions of acres of deep-rooted native prairie grass, the only thing physically holding the fragile soil together, and they planted wheat. For a few unusually wet years, it seemed to work, but then the inevitable happened. The weather returned to its historical arid baseline, the rain stopped, the wheat died. And when the high winds of the plains came sweeping through, there was nothing anchoring the dirt to the earth. The result was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. It remains one of the worst man-made ecological disasters in human history. Massive black blizzards swept across the country. The dust was so thick it literally blocked out the sun, choking livestock and burying entire homes. The soil from the Great Plains blew all the way to Washington, D.C., coating the desks of the exact politicians who had ignored John Wesley Powell 50 years earlier. The empty space had fought back against human arrogance, and it won effortlessly. The disaster completely broke the agrarian dream of the plains, forcing the largest migration in American history as millions fled west toward California, leaving the dead zone behind them. But if you book a window seat on a flight over the American West today, you won't just see a barren wasteland of blowing dust. You will see thousands of perfect bright green circles stamped into the desert. The United States currently grows a massive percentage of its wheat, corn, and beef in a region that, scientifically speaking, still barely gets any rain. The climate hasn't changed to become more forgiving. If anything, it's gotten hotter. So, how did the United States manage to beat the 100th Meridian? We didn't beat it. We cheated. Beneath the dry dirt of the Great Plains lies the Ogallala aquifer. It is one of the largest underground freshwater reservoirs in the entire world. It's a hidden ocean covering 174,000 square miles, sitting directly beneath the exact area where the sky refuses to cooperate. To be clear, the Ogallala is not a giant cavernous underground lake. It is essentially a massive sponge made of gravel, sand, and silt, completely saturated with water. And this water didn't come from recent rainstorms. It is what geologists call fossil water. It was trapped underground by melting glaciers during the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. For centuries, this water sat untouched because humans simply didn't have the technology to reach it. But following World War II, advances in industrial engineering and cheap diesel power changed everything. Farmers realized they could drill hundreds of feet down, install massive turbine pumps, and force the ancient water to the surface. Suddenly, it didn't matter that the sky wasn't providing rain. We could just aggressively slurp up the ancient water from beneath our feet. In 1947, a farmer named Frank Zybach invented a machine that would alter the face of the planet, center pivot irrigation. By anchoring a long pipe to a central well and putting it on motorized wheels, farmers could automatically water hundreds of acres in a perfect circle. This is what creates those green polka dots you see from airplanes. This single technological breakthrough turned the Great American Desert into one of the most productive agricultural empires on the planet. We use this fossil water to grow massive amounts of corn and alfalfa in a landscape where those crops have no biological business growing. We then feed that crop to millions of cattle. It is a multi-billion-dollar economic cheat code that feeds a huge portion of the globe and secures America's status as an agricultural superpower. We engineered a miracle in the desert, but there is a fatal, unavoidable flaw in the system. So the Midwest survives by mining ancient fossil water from the ground. But what about the rest of the West? What about the massive, sprawling cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles that sit directly in the driest parts of the dead zone? To survive, they rely on the surface water, the rivers fueled by the melting snowpack of the Rocky Mountains. But managing that water brings up a massive logistical nightmare. Because the United States manages water in the West using a legal framework so bizarre and outdated, it almost feels like a prank. To understand it, you have to look at the East Coast. In the East, it rains constantly, so water is abundant. Their legal system relies on what are called riparian rights. Basically, if a river runs through your property or next to your property, you have a reasonable right to use that water. You share it with your neighbors, it is logical, cooperative, and it works perfectly in a place where water falls from the sky for free. But when settlers crossed the 100th Meridian, they realized riparian rights were useless. There wasn't enough water to share. So the miners of the 1800s invented a new system, prior appropriation. Or in plain English, first come, first served. In the West, water is treated exactly like a gold claim. Whoever showed up first diverted the water and filed the paperwork legally owns the rights to that specific amount of water forever. And those rights are ranked by date. This creates a terrifying modern reality. Let's say a farmer's great-grandfather claimed water rights to a river in 1880. Downstream from him is a massive modern city of 3 million people, built in 1950. If a severe drought hits, the law dictates that the city does not get to simply share the water. The farmer holds the senior water right. It doesn't matter if millions of people are facing a drinking water crisis. The farmer legally gets to take his entire share first to water his cows, while the city's reservoirs go completely dry. But the absolute most absurd part of prior appropriation is a legal clause known as beneficial use. In order to keep your historical water rights, the government dictates that you must use your entire allocation of water every single year, or you legally forfeit it. It is literally a use it or lose it policy. This means that if a farmer decides to be environmentally conscious, updates to high-tech drip irrigation, and saves millions of gallons of water, the government will penalize him by permanently revoking his right to the water he saved. So, farmers are legally incentivized to intentionally flood their fields and waste billions of gallons of water in the middle of a desert simply to protect their legal paperwork. We have built an entire civilization in a drought zone, governed by laws that legally punish conservation. You can write all the legal paperwork you want, you can pass laws demanding that farmers use their water, and you can build entire cities based on the assumption that the rivers will always flow. But at the end of the day, you cannot legislate water into existence, and the physical reality of the American West is crashing headfirst into a brick wall. Remember, the Ogallala aquifer is fossil water. It does not refill. In parts of Texas and Kansas, the water table has already dropped by over 150 feet. The massive turbine pumps are sucking up mud and sand. Generational farmers are being forced to completely abandon their fields because drilling a deeper well is physically impossible. The water just isn't there anymore. The depletion is so severe that the actual elevation of the United States is changing. As the water is sucked out of the gravel sponge beneath the earth, the empty spaces collapse. This is a process called land subsidence. In certain areas of the West, the ground is literally sinking by several inches every single year, cracking highways and shattering the foundations of homes. The geography is actively collapsing in on itself, but a dry aquifer is only half of the modern crisis. To make matters exponentially worse, the invisible wall is moving. The 100th meridian was originally defined by that magic number, 20 inches of rainfall. But recent climate data has revealed a terrifying new reality. As average temperatures rise, the atmosphere gets hotter, and a hotter atmosphere acts like a giant sponge, evaporating moisture out of the soil at a much faster rate. This means that even if a region gets its normal 20 inches of rain, the intense heat evaporates it before the crops can use it. Because of this, scientists have noted that the aridity line, the dead zone, is actively expanding eastward. The 100th Meridian has effectively shifted 140 miles east, settling closer to the 98th Meridian. The dry, empty space is slowly marching toward the crowded east. Millions of acres of farmland that used to survive on natural rainfall are suddenly finding themselves on the wrong side of the invisible wall. Geography isn't just a collection of borders and state capitals you had to memorize in high school. It is a living, physical force that dictates the rise and fall of empires. The modern American West was built on a foundation of boundless optimism, incredible industrial engineering, and a dangerous amount of denial. We looked at a massive continental dead zone, ignored the warnings of the scientists who mapped it, and decided to build sprawling desert metropolises and a multi-billion-dollar agricultural empire anyway. We terraformed a desert using ancient water that will never come back, governed by laws that literally punish people for trying to save it. The empty space in America exists for a reason, and no amount of human engineering has truly solved it. We've only delayed the inevitable. The 100th Meridian continues to silently define the nation, just as it did when the first pioneers looked out at the dry brown plains and hoped for rain. Sooner or later, the ancient fossil water is going to run out. The rivers will continue to shrink, and the invisible wall will keep marching east. The American superpower is going to have to make some very hard, very expensive choices about where people are allowed to live and what we are allowed to grow. But hey, at least we got a solid century of really cheap corn out of it.